Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We are happy to have you here for the first 60 Minutes to Mastery series monthly webinar. We are focusing on the comprehensive needs assessment today. My name is Michelle Pereira, and I am the Title 1A coordinator. I'm happy to have with me today Patty Dalrymple. She is our school improvement coordinator. She brings a lot of expertise and lived-in experience um, to our conversation today. I'm really excited to have her.
Thank you.
So, what is a comprehensive needs assessment or a CNA? A comprehensive needs assessment, to put it plainly, is a process of looking at your data and using that data to help build a path between where you are and where you want to be. It's your guiding light that determines how you build, maintain, or improve your systems and programs to support your learners. So the purpose of the CNA is that it is a requirement in many of our ESEA programs. So specifically Title 1A, School Improvement, Title 1C, and Title 4A have requirements to complete a CNA. So this helps you identify needs that you will use to you will use your federal funds to support those needs. So in order to use those funds, though, there has to be a need identified in that comprehensive needs assessment in order to justify the use of those funds to support those programs. So timing for a CNA. So the best time to conduct or review an existing needs assessment is either in April or May, before the school year ends and before the CFSGA is submitted for the next school year. For the CFSGA, it's important to do this process before you do your CFSGA because what you put in your CFSGA is a direct result of the results of your comprehensive needs assessment. The identifications that you made in that will inform what you put in your CFSGA to support your findings from your CNA. So this gives you time to review your data and information by completing this in April or May. Now, understanding that you can review your CNA at any time during the year, it's actually encouraged. And it's also really important to come back to it if you have some big changes in your LEA. Like, let's say, unfortunately, there was a fire at one of your schools, or there was a large influx of maybe a large population of refugee students. And so you would need to revise your CNA and take a look at your data and see, well, how can we support these learners now? It's changed from where it was when we started. And you may need to revise things and adjust because of that. As part of your CNA process, it's important to keep records of your process and the results from your CNA. This is very important for federal programs monitoring. In our monitoring tool, there are several indicators that reference the CNA. And so you want to keep records of your outreach that you're doing to your stakeholders and your community, including like invitations to stakeholders to participate, newsletters where you put information about this, emails, photos of signboards. Like if you have an electronic signboard or even one where you put the letters on it where you refer to this, take a picture of it. And then while you're doing your meetings, your planning meetings, keep your agendas, keep your sign-in sheets and your meeting notes. Make sure that you have those items for those meetings. And then what data you use to provide input for your needs assessment. So the types of data that you used. And then if you send out any surveys to your stakeholders, a summary of those results that you receive back would be most beneficial. This is not an exhaustive list of all of the records, but it's a good idea to keep the records that show your thinking, how you got to your results, and how you did your outreach. So we are going to move into the actual diving into the CNA itself. And so there are 5 phases of the CNA, and we'll walk through each of the phases of the CNA. So the first one that we're looking at today is plan. And so the plan is to determine the purpose and intended outcomes of your CNA process. So this is where you're going to start working on your guiding questions. You're going to identify your relevant stakeholders, and you're going to kind of define what your focus is. It may change as you complete this process. The next one is collecting and organizing data. So you want to organize your readily available data that you have, and then determine if there's any other additional data that's needed for this process. Our next phase is interpreting information. And so this is where you've looked at your data and you're kind of crystallizing your themes that you found from your data analysis. Like maybe there's something that stood out to you that, okay, this is where we want to focus our energy on, which leads into determining priorities. So you're going to conclude your findings and your themes, decide which ones will have your greatest impact if you can address them. And then at this point, does any other additional data need to be collected and reviewed? Like, do we need to go back a couple phases and kind of re-review or add in some new data? And then we're going to move into connecting to implementation. So this is where you're going to use the results to create meaningful long-term change. You're going to investigate the root cause of the priorities and reflect on progress of improvement efforts. And so kind of in between the connect to implementation and the plan again, when the phases start over, is where you're going to review it and evaluate it and see if what you did is working or if we need to make adjustments. All right, so we're going to move into the elements of a successful needs assessment. So within the cycle of the CNA, there are 4 essential elements that you need to consider at each phase of the cycle. And this is where I want to welcome Patty to speak.
Let's go ahead and move to the next slide here, and
Yes.
then I'll connect it here.
Thank you. First,
go ahead.
yes, so for success, you want to have meaningful engagement of all of your concerned stakeholders in this process. And it's not just 1 or 2 people filling out a survey or working on this behind closed doors. So take it from here, Patty.
Yeah, so the involvement of your stakeholders is really important, but they're not going to be an essential piece of every phase. So when you start out and you're making a plan for your comprehensive needs assessment, they're going to be involved and they're going to be helping you decide how are we going to do this needs assessment. Are we going to send out surveys? Because that's one way of collecting data from all your stakeholders. Are we going to have in-person focus groups? Who will facilitate them? Are we going to include students? Are we not going to include students? And what kinds of information are we really looking for? And so your stakeholders are going to be very much involved in that planning aspect of it. And then when you move to the next phase, which is collecting the data, they're probably not going to be as involved because we do want to be careful that They're not looking at individual student data. And so your school staff are going to probably be the ones that lead this part of it. And then also interpreting or at least getting to summaries of what the data is telling you and organizing it by grade levels. If it's a district wide, it will be all, all grade levels. If it's in a school, you could look at, try not to do it too individualized. But then when you're determining the priorities, which is kind of that fourth circle in our cycle, that's when you're going to bring those stakeholders back in and say, and you're going to summarize the data, you're going to summarize what you found in the data, and then they're going to help you identify which things are we going to work on first. Which things are we going to do right now? Which ones are going to take a little bit longer to work on, and we need to plan those. And then in that next phase, when you're starting to write that implementation plan or that action plan, your parents or your other stakeholders will be involved in some of that. How are you going to, what is it that we're going to do? They may not be the actual people doing the action plan, but they're certainly going to have some feedback on the actions that you're going to take to get this needs assessment done. And then once that cycle is complete and you've kind of done it, you're going to invite some back to reflect on it and say, was this effective? Did we did we focus on the right things? Did we get the intended results? And if not, we need to change some things, and how might we do that? And you're going to involve them in that process as well.
Nice. Thank you, Patty. All right, so the first essential element of for a successful needs assessment is that it needs to be needs driven and have a context specific approach. So your local needs should drive the needs assessment so that it's unique to your LEA and to your area. You can use an existing framework or develop your own. The needs assessment, though, should include a pulse check of the culture of your LEA, including determining your ability to make any changes. Is there anything hindering you in making these changes? The climate of your surrounding area. And so that is it's not just the weather, but is there something going on like in your community that may affect this? And the perspectives of those stakeholders in the needs assessment process. It's important to consider these factors when looking at the needs of your learners and prioritizing the strategies that would be the most beneficial to them. And then Patty, I believe you have an example for this.
Yeah, so let's say you want to improve your math achievement. You know that math is a struggle and you're not seeming to get any traction on it. So you decide that you need to learn more about that. If you only look at needs driven, you are going to be asking questions around your math instruction, but you're also just going to pull your math data, and you might find that problem solving is an area. So then, okay, we're going to do more problem solving because that's an area that our kids are not doing as well in. Well, that's all good and well. But unless you also involve the context around that, it might not be a math issue. It might actually be an ELA issue if our students are having trouble reading those math problems. And so the importance of having the context in the needs is you're going to start looking at other things that could have influence on those math scores, such as ELA. Are they able to read and comprehend the story problems? Or maybe you also consider the time that you dedicate to math. Take a time audit of your instruction and drill down on how much is instruction versus how much is just practice. And you might change those other things that influence. So that's why it's important to make sure that you also have a need, but you're also involving the other outside factors that influence that.
So the second essential element for a successful needs assessment is rigorous data analysis. So you want to include diverse data sets and high quality data sets. So diverse is multiple data types, including qualitative and quantitative data. And then you want to use high quality data that is considered valid and reliable in order to do that rigorous data analysis. So you're going to kind of aggregate that and compare across those data sources to help you form a focus or a conclusion for your comprehensive needs assessment. And Patty has a great example for this.
Yeah, one of the schools that I was involved in doing looking at achievement, and they were looking at both math and ELA. They actually, on the onset, they said, let's look at all of our ISAT data and let's track it back. And they tracked it back 8 to 10 years. And what they were looking for were trends. Like, is this a problem? What is happening over time? Do we have a constant problem or not? And so what they found is, I think they're first graders for some reason. And so this was more of they used, I can't remember which one, but they were looking at their math progress monitoring. But anyway, it always dipped in first grade. And so they were trying to figure out what was the cause there. And so by tracking back everything, they were able to find out that it wasn't a teacher problem because they had had several different teachers in that grade level. It wasn't the cohort of students because they did fine in other years, but it was just that grade level, and that they were missing a vital piece of content that was not in their standard curriculum. And so what they found out was that they needed to have some supplemental curriculum to fill in that gap. And so really looking hard at your data and over time can help you narrow down the need. Because, when you first say, oh, we need help with math, that is huge. And we need to be able to narrow it down, like, what in math do we really need to focus our efforts?
With that rigorous data analysis, multiple data types will be key here. So you want to make sure that you're not looking at just one type of data to inform your decision making or your planning. You want to look at multiple data points, data types to help inform that and provide a diverse viewpoint of what's going on. And so there's several different types of data that you can choose from. This is not an exhaustive list. But there are several ones here that we didn't list that you were more than welcome to include. But there is one that Patty has a great example regarding attendance.
Yeah, so I was in one of the schools that I was working with. They were frustrated because their interventions were not going well. And one of the constant complaints was that the staff doing the interventions kept being pulled for subs. And so the principal started to track their staff attendance data, and they did it weekly, and then they shared it with their staff. And what they found out, it was just as bad as their students. And so their students were not receiving the best first instruction from their teachers because their teachers weren't there. I mean, the reverse is true also. When our students aren't at school, they're not receiving instruction. But if our teachers are not at school, they also are not receiving instruction. So the nice thing about that is once it was brought to attention with the whole staff, and the principal shared it with them and had them look at the data from week to week, and they monitored it, they started to realize that there was a lot of times that they could have structured their time better and not had taken as many absence days. And so their actual teacher attendance improved just by bringing awareness to it, which then helped them get to their interventions appropriately.
That's a great example. So a third essential element for a successful comprehensive needs assessment is stakeholder engagement. So this should be as diverse of a group as possible, in that it should not be just one type of viewpoint. Um, Parents have to be included. It is in law that you have to collaborate with parents as part of your comprehensive needs assessment process. The preference is not parents that work for you, because you're looking for unique perspectives. However, if that is what you have, that is okay too. And Patty, you have an example of a district that had the parents that were that. Yes, I'll just let you take it from here.
Yeah, I did. Another school that I was working with, a very small, rural, tiny community. The school was basically the biggest employer. And so most of the parents, or most of the staff had students in the school. And so it was really hard for them to find a parent that was not employed by the school district, but they were able to use one of their bus drivers because their bus driver was not involved in the day-to-day activities and the day-to-day going-ons of the school. And so they were still able to bring out that outside perspective, even though they were an employee of the school district. And so sometimes you have to get a little creative, but the goal is to have different viewpoints. I do want to bring a couple other things that I think is important is if you have a high percentage of Native American students, you actually could be required to have tribal representation. And so if you are in an area where your school is on a reservation or you do have that high number of Native American students, you do need to reach out to the tribe and allow them to be part of this process. Um, Another school that I was part of used their students in their needs assessment, and they did some focus groups with students, and they did it as far as their junior high and their high school students. And so students can give you a lot of insight about what's going well in your school and what's not going well. And so don't rule them out. They sometimes can be a good asset for you.
Yes, because they are very honest and they will tell you what's not working and what's working. And then for the students that were part of that focus group, like what kind of questions did you ask them?
Oh, yeah. So, one of the things was like when you graduate from this school district, what do you want to know and be able to do? Which was really empowering them. You could see, you got a feel for how many of your students were really college minded and how many were more of a trade minded. And so that would help the school be able to make decisions based on that. We also asked what's working well that we need to keep doing and really looking for your school's strengths, because what you don't want to do in trying to do improvement efforts, you don't want to take away something that's going really well to replace it with something that you don't know yet. The third question that was asked, and this was a pretty bold choice, is like, what needs to change? um, because that's pretty wide open, and they could come up with lots of different things. But they were front loaded with, we really value your opinion there, and so we really are looking for the things that really need to be changed in our school so that you can reach your goal when you graduate. And so it helped them be able to focus a little bit better and not just complain about the things they don't like, but they really gave some good feedback to their schools on the things that they wished were a little bit different.
What are some examples that you have of how to engage parents to be a part of this, especially ones that aren't involved or they don't want to commit to this?
Right. Um, so one of the schools that I actually helped, I was part of the needs assessment committee that actually did a needs assessment. I was kind of in charge of that part, and I had sent out flyers. I had sent home notes. We had posted on an all call and asking for parents to volunteer, and we didn't get any response. And I finally started like, I need to think about some students. So I thought about students that had, or parents that had students in all of our things like elementary, junior high, and high school. And then, and I called them and I said, hey, I think you would be a great person to be on this committee to help us with our needs assessment. And I told them what it was about. And it was that personal connection and that personal invitation that I had 7 that I reached out to, and I got 5 of them to be on the committee.
That's a pretty good return on investment right there. Um, and then that, like being more collaborative like that, that helps build trust between you and your stakeholder groups too, by involving them like this. Um, and then can you speak more about getting feedback from your stakeholders before you write the plan versus just presenting it to them?
Yeah. Um, and this is where I have seen schools, all good intentions, but they write their plan because you're under a timetable and you've got to get it done. And so it was easy for them to just write the plan and then give it to their PTO and say, please give us some feedback, which is great. You can still get some good things, but they really weren't an integral part of being engaged in the process. And so it's really important that you're thinking ahead, and that's the whole part of that first phase, is really putting a good plan together and get parents involved in that first part, because they have outreach. They can get out to a lot of people in your communities, just in their own social circles that they have. And they can bring good information from a wide number, and it actually makes your feedback expand bigger, so that you are reaching more of your community than just 1 or 2 by asking them to look at a plan.
Example. Thank you, Patty. So the fourth part, or the fourth essential element, to a successful needs assessment, to that process, is collaborative identification of improvement needs. So priorities need to be defined as a product of working collaboratively with your stakeholders or your focus groups. They need to be involved from the very beginning at the planning stage and then throughout implementation. There's a difference, which Patty just mentioned, about between having stakeholders involved and having them being truly engaged. And then Patty mentioned that the level of impact increases with that level of engagement. So, yeah, so we'll move into some best practices. And I will turn this over to Patty.
Okay. One of the things there, so people for outreach, you want to be specific, you want to be strategic in the people that you're reaching out to be as part of the committee, because you what you don't want is to end up with a lot of people are just going to spend the time complaining. So you need to be able to reach out, which is the importance of being able to reach out by phone, giving, and inviting them, because then you can get people who can give you great input, that have a good connection in the community, and are going to be able to come and give constructive feedback, not just complaints and say, hey, you need to fix this, but they actually will give you ideas on how you might be able to fix it. The data, again, use your data that connects to your purpose. But also remember, the example that I gave with the math is sometimes it's reading also. So make sure that you're gathering all the data that will connect and have those influences on a specific need as well. And then we've mentioned this, thinking about parents, doing a focus group is a one way of involving the parents. Surveys also can work well. It depends on your community and whether or not you get a good return on that. The context, this is the climate of your surrounding area. I will share one thing. When we did the parent focus groups, we were in our district in a state of turmoil. There was very little trust between the school and the community. And so when we decided to do these parent focus groups, we did them according to our school board zones. And so we did one in each zone, and we asked a parent to gather a collection, gather a group of parents, invite them to their house. We went to their house, we asked the questions, but our 2 staff members that went and did all of those, we were strategic in picking 2 staff people that were well respected in the community and had a level of trust within the community so that they would talk, because we didn't want to just get the complaints or make it confrontational. We really wanted, no, we want to listen to you. And we facilitated those meetings to where we really were just listening. We were not doing any instructing. And if you want to talk more about the process, reach out to me. I'm happy to walk you through it. The next one here is the analyzing the results. Look for some easy wins, because that's going to build trust in your community. If you can say, oh, this one's really easy, we can start that one in a week, do it, because then they feel like the input that they gave you is, 1, being listened to, 1, being respected, or 2, being respected because you actually did something with it. And then your parents are going to feel a little bit more more willing to share with you. And then make a plan to work on the bigger issues. So get as many quick wins as you can, and then work on the big ones. And then longevity, this is a really good point. If you really take the effort to do a really good needs assessment, this is going to save you time in the long run, because a good one should last you 3 to 4 years before you have to do it again. Unless you have something drastic. Michelle had mentioned earlier, you get an influx of refugee students, or your school burns down. I remember that in high school. My high school burned down and we got shifted around. So it really did change our dynamics in our community. And so, but aside from that, you should be able to use that information for a lot of different things across Title I, Title II, Title IV, Title 1C. So take the time and really do a good one, and you only have to do it every 3 or 4 years.
Yes, and while you were, I think this was earlier, but I wrote down something that we had talked about before was in your CNA process, you don't like talking about like tiered groups in your CNA process where you don't have to have the same person doing the whole thing. You can have different groups doing different things and sharing with each other. So is that something you can talk more on about that?
So we had a core committee, and then so some of us did the parent focus groups, some of us did the student focus groups, because we did student groups and we did teacher groups. So somebody else did the teacher groups, and then we came together to, look at all of the data together. And then, yeah, so we divided the work. One person cannot do all of this work. It really does take a team of people to do all of this and to do it well. I think there was something I wanted to add. So a lot of this is talking about doing a big needs assessment. If you are looking at like specifically Title 1C, I know that one sometimes can be a hard needs assessment to do, but you can to your big one, you can also ask questions that that hone in on one of your the other plans. So involve a question that talks about the needs of your migrant students. Add a question that talks about the needs of your English learners. And then another way, but then you can follow up specifically with those groups with a survey that could give you more information and make it a little bit broader for just your migrant, because I know that, you know, those types of funds are very specific to migrant students. And so you really need to hone in on their specific needs. And so you can still use the big one for your general feelings, around school improvement or just, you know, program improvement, but then really hone in by asking a follow-up survey just to select parents that have students in those subgroups.
That's a good idea to use that information to inform other CNAs that may be required in other programs. Yeah. All right, so we're going to move into resources. So we have on our federal programs webpage, we do have a resource center. So this resource center has like your online applications, like your CFSGA or ELMS or EMSIS. It has links for those, but it also has training information, resources from trainings that we have done or will do. So there will be a 60 Minutes to Mastery series section coming soon. And in that section is we will have information from all of these webinars that we will be doing. So the slides will be there, the handouts, the recordings, and I will send out an email once that section has been set up. But here's the link for our Federal Programs Resource Center if you need it. And then the SWIP is actually a good resource itself. And within the SWIP, there is a needs assessment guiding document that's also a good resource to help guide your conversations. And I'll let Patty talk more about that.
Yeah. Thanks, Michelle. This really, the SWIP application is your school-wide / improvement plan. So it can be used for your Title I plan, school-wide plan, or it can be used for school improvement. If you're CSI up, you have to use it, but it can be a place to hold your annual Title I plans in it. And so built into the application is the needs assessment. There's 10 different areas in which you ask some guiding questions about, and then write a summary in there. And the document that's linked in that area has a wide range of questions that you can ask in each of the areas. It does focus a little bit more on instruction and your tier 1 instruction, your tier 2 and tier 3 instruction. And so it's more academic, you know, because Title I and school improvement is about closing achievement gaps. So it is a little bit heavier in that area, but it's a good place to start. And it might get you some questions that you can ask and use in your own needs assessment.
Thank you, Patty. So the next resource that we have for you is a document. It's called the Guiding Questions and Essential Actions for the 5 Phases of the Needs Assessment Implementation Process. So it has like the kind of the circle, I call it the circle, you know, circle of life, if you will, the circle of the 5 phases. And then within that document, it has guiding questions and the essential elements, so that needs-driven and context-specific approach, the rigorous data analysis, the stakeholder engagement, etc. So those are all tied to specific portions of the 5 phases. So they're customized to that to help guide your work. And the guiding questions are unique to each phase of the needs assessment implementation. So this is a resource for you to use in your planning and to help with those questions and determining priorities too. So that this document will be posted on the Federal Programs Resources webpage in that 60 Minutes to Mastery series section. And talking about the 60 Minutes to Mastery series, if you have gotten this far in this presentation, if you have anything that you would like to learn more about, if you like topics that you would like to see for future parts of this series, please reach out to me and let me know what those topics are. And here's my contact information for doing that. We want to thank you for joining us today, and thank you very much to Patty for her expertise and being part of this conversation with us. And thank you so much.